New videos every day.
Have you ever seen one of these? Well, it's a shock collar. You put it on your dog, and if your dog misbehaves, you press a button and it causes them pain. So, for example, if your dog barks too much, you would push the button, and it would shock them, and hopefully the dog would stop barking. Now, this is pretty controversial. A lot of animal rights activists disagree with the approach of using a mechanism to cause an animal pain to train them. And in fact, even some animal trainers disagree with this approach. Now, what if I told you that a device like this was being used on human beings, and in fact, children? So here we have a child, and the child has a backpack on. The backpack is actually like a shock collar that you would use on a dog. But what it's called is a GED, which stands for Graduated Electronic Deceleration Device. So in the backpack, there's a battery, and there's a remote control receiver, and the battery is connected to the legs, the arms, and the torso, and sometimes all three. And there's a staff member that has a remote, and every time he triggers the remote, the child receives a 2-second electric shock. Is it painful? Well, according to the school, it's no more painful than a bee sting. But have you ever heard of anyone being afraid of bees? Because apparently, bee stings can be traumatizing. Mother Jones magazine did an investigative report on this, and they interviewed an ex-student. The ex-student claimed that the shock hurt like hell, and the reporter wanted to try it himself, so he did, and this is what he said about it. When I tried the shock, it felt like a horde of wasps attacking me all at once. 2 seconds never felt so long. So I can say a lot about this school, and I'll probably do a few more videos on this later, but right now I have a report, and this report is called Observations and Findings of Out-of-State Program Visitation, Judge Rotenberg Educational Center. And I also have our chart here, our brainwashing chart used in the Korean War, also in Guantanamo Bay. And what I'm going to do is go over the behavioral modification techniques they use in the school and compare it with the brainwashing techniques they used in the Korean War and see how they compare. So the first point I want to make is on this title of the chart. Now, it says, Communist Coercive Methods for Eliciting Individual Compliance. And the word coercive is used. And what does that mean? Well, I have a couple definitions. The first one is to compel by force, intimidation, or authority, especially without regard for individual desire or volition. So, you're using force and intimidation to control someone regardless of what they want. The second one, to bring about, through the use of force or other forms of compulsion, to coerce obedience. So, you're using force to get someone to obey you. The third, to dominate or control, especially by exploiting fear, anxiety, etc. So, you're using fear and anxiety to control someone. Now, by using these shock devices on children, do you think this is coercion? So it's coercive methods for eliciting individual compliance. And why would you use coercive methods? Because you are trying to get someone to comply with you or obey you. And I have this paragraph from the Mother Jones article, and it says, Michael, now 19, suffers from mental retardation and severe autism. These days, when he comes home for a visit, Margaretti, his mother, carries his shock activator in her purse. All she has to do, she says, is show it to him. He'll automatically comply to whatever my signal command may be, whether it be, put on your seatbelt, or hand me that apple, or sit appropriately and eat your food. She says, it's made him a human being, a civilized human being. So in other words, Mom has a remote control in her purse that's connected to the shock device that her son wears. And whenever Mom wants her son to do something, all she does is show her son the remote control. And the son does whatever she says. Now, she claims that her son is a civilized human being. Now, does this sound like a civilized human being? Or does this sound like a slave? So that's my first point. The behavioral modification techniques used in this school are coercive methods for eliciting compliance. And that's just what they are. That's what they are. So this list, this brainwashing list, lists 8 different coercive methods to control someone. And what I'm going to do is compare these methods with the methods used in this school. And we're going to see how they relate. 8 coercive methods for eliciting compliance. Now, out of these 8 coercive methods, how many of these methods are being used on the children in the school? So the first coercive method on this chart is isolation. And the effects are deprives victim of all social support of his ability to resist, develops an intense concern with self, makes victim dependent on interrogator. So, is isolation, any form of isolation, used in the school? So this report also says, Judge Rotenberg's center promotes a setting that discourages social interaction between staff and students and among students. So, the students are discouraged to communicate with other students, and they're discouraged from communicating with staff members. From the Mother Joan magazine article. And it says, at the Rotenberg Center, an elaborate system of rewards and punishments govern all interactions. Well-behaved kids can watch TV, go for pizza, play basketball. Students who've earned points for good behavior visit a store stocked with DVD players, CDs, cologne, PlayStation 2, Essence magazine, knockoff Prada purses, anything the staff thinks the students might want. But even more prized is a visit to the big reward store, an arcade full of pinball machines, video games, a pool table, and the most popular feature, a row of 42-inch flat-screen TVs hooked up to the Xbox 360s. Students like the big reward store for another reason. It's the only place many can socialize freely. At the Rotenberg Center, students have to earn the right to talk to each other. We had to wait until we were in the big reward store to communicate with each other, says Isabel. That was the only time you really laughed, had fun, hung around with your friends, because usually you can't talk to them. It's basically like we had to have enemies. They didn't want us to be friendly with nobody. So here we have this thing called the Big Reward Store. And it says, it's the only place many can socialize freely. At the Rotenberg Center, students have to earn the right to talk to each other. So basically, on a day-to-day basis, you're not allowed to talk to anyone. Now, is this a form of isolation? And does this deprive children of all social support and his ability to resist the program? So the second coercive method is monopolization of perception. And the effects are fixes attention upon immediate predicament, fosters introspection, eliminates stimuli competing with those controlled by capture, frustrates all actions not consistent with compliance. And the variants of this are physical isolation, darkness or bright light, barren environment, restricted movement, and monotonous food. So one of the methods of monopolization of perception is limitation of movement. So I'm going to go ahead and read you this. It comes out of the report, and it says movement limitation. Movement limitation is another commonly used level 3 intervention that may be applied manually or mechanically. When applied manually, staff members physically hold the student. With mechanical movement limitation, the student is strapped onto some form of physical apparatus. For example, a 4-point platform board designed specifically for this purpose, or a helmet with thick padding and narrow facial grid that reduces sensory stimuli to the ears and eye. Another form of mechanical restraint occurs when the student is in a 5-point restraint in a chair. Students may be restrained for extensive periods of time, hours, or intermittently for days when restraint is used as a punishment consequence. Many students are required to carry their own restraint bag in which the restraint straps are contained. So this paragraph lists 2 types of monopolization of perception. One is restraint. You physically restrain the child, hold them down, or mechanically hold the child down. And the other thing is putting a helmet over the child's head to limit the hearing and the vision. So the third technique for coercion is induced debilitation, exhaustion. And the effects of this are weakens mental and physical ability to resist. And the variations of this are semi-starvation, exposure, exploitation of wounds, induced illness, sleep deprivation, prolonged constraint, prolonged interrogation or forced writing, or overexertion. So obviously the school's not going to be using all of these methods like inducing illness or exploiting wounds, but one of these methods is prolonged constraint. And I just read you that students may be restrained for extensive periods of time, hours, or intermittently for days when constraint is used as a punishing consequence. So another form of induced debilitation they use in the center is some students are made to sit on a cushioned seat that will automatically administer a shock for the targeted behavior of standing up, while others wear waist holsters that will administer a skin shock if the student pulls his or her hands out of the holster. So in other words, they have you sit in a chair, and if you get up, you're shocked, and you're shocked every 3 seconds until you sit down. This is a form of debilitation. You can't stand up and you can't walk. And the other thing is they have the holster that you put your hands into. And if you move your hands out, you get shocked until you move your hands back in every 3 seconds. So that too is a form of debilitation because you can't use your hands. Threats, which cultivates anxiety and despair. So as far as threat, well, the program itself is using threat to get compliance. You are constantly worried whether or not you're going to get shocked, or you're worried whether you're going to get your full meal. It's using threat to make you do what they want you to do. So the fifth method of coercion is occasional indulgences. The effects of this are it provides positive motivation for compliance, it hinders adjustment to deprivation, And the variations of this are occasional favors, fluctuations of interrogators' attitude, promises, rewards for partial compliance, and tantalizing. So not only are they using punishment for bad behavior like shocks and restraint and not allowing you to eat all of your food, but they're also rewarding you for what they think is good behavior. Remember the big rewards store? Now, it's where well-behaved kids can watch TV, go for pizza, play basketball. Students who have earned points for good behavior visit a store stocked with DVD players, CDs, cologne, PlayStation 2, Essence magazines, and knockoff Prada purses. So this whole program is a big tantalization. The sixth method of coercion is demonstrating omnipotence and omniscience. Omnipotence means complete control, and omniscience means all-knowing. And the effects of this is it suggests futility of resistance. The variations of this are confrontations, pretending cooperation taken for granted, demonstrating complete control over a victim's fate. So here's a picture of part of the surveillance system. Video surveillance system monitoring includes most bathrooms and all bedrooms, but no formal staff monitoring system is in place to ensure the privacy and dignity of students, consumers, during intimate grooming, hygiene, or personal sexual behavior, like masturbation. For example, no procedures were in place to ensure staff was not observing opposite-sex residents during showering. So there's cameras everywhere in the bathrooms and the bedrooms. Everything done is seen by the staff. The use of camera monitoring allows for delayed punishment. In cases where the student did not receive the shock, the individual reviewing the video footage from earlier in the day reports to the psychologist, who then makes the determination that the shock should be applied long after the targeted behavior occurred. One student reported of an instance when she had returned to her residence and fallen asleep. She was woken without explanation and told to stand. She was given a shock across her stomach, and then was informed that the reason for the punishment was a target behavior done earlier that day for which she did not receive a shock for. The seventh method of coercion is degradation. And the effects of this are it makes cost of resistance appear more damaging to self-esteem than capitulation. And it reduces prisoner to animal-level concerns. The variations of this are personal hygiene prevented, filthy, infested surroundings, demeaning punishments, insults and taunts, and denial of privacy. So under degradation, you have denial of privacy. Now, we already went over the fact that there's cameras in every single room, but I'm going to read you this. It says, Rob was forced to wear a backpack containing 5 2-pound battery-operated devices, each connected to an electrode attached to his skin. I felt humiliated, he said. You have a bunch of wires coming out of your shirt and pants. Rob remained hooked up to the apparatus 24 hours a day. He wore it while jogging on the treadmill and playing basketball, though it wasn't easy to sink a jump shot with a 10-pound backpack on. When he showered, a staff member would remove the electrodes, all except the one on his arm, which he had to hold outside the shower to keep it dry. At night, Rob slept next to the backpack under the gaze of surveillance cameras. So you're made to wear a backpack with electrodes connected to it for 24 hours a day. And in fact, even when you take a shower, you still have an electrode taped to your arm, so you have to hold your arm out when you shower, and there's a staff member ready to shock you right outside of your shower door. Another form of degradation is demeaning punishments. And here's another thing from this report. It says, a combination of mechanical restraint and shock is used to administer a consequence to students that attempt to remove the shock device from their bodies. The student is mechanically restrained on a platform, and shocks are applied at varying intervals. An example of this is found on one student's behavior program. A consequence for pulling a fire alarm is to receive 5 shocks over a 10-minute period, while being restrained on a 4-point board. So in other words, the kid pulled a fire alarm and they restrained him on a board 4 ways, hands and feet, and they shock him in a 10-minute interval 5 times randomly, so the kid doesn't even know when he's going to be shocked. So another form of degradation is insults and taunts. And there's a thing that they use called behavior rehearsal lesson. And what they do is the student is forcibly challenged to do what the procedure seeks to eliminate. If the student attempts to pull away, he receives a shock. If the student attempts to follow through with the high-risk behavior, he receives multiple shocks at closer intervals. So you're literally taunting the child to do what you don't want him to do. And if he does it, he gets shocked multiple times. And if he flinches away, he gets shocked as well. So the 8th method of coercion is enforcing trivial demands. And this is, the effects of this is develops habits of compliance. Obviously, there are a lot of rules and regulations. Now, a couple of them would be, you're not supposed to talk to your fellow classmates. You're not supposed to leave your chair. You're not supposed to talk out of turn. In fact, there was an example given of a girl that was warned because she talked out of a turn and needed a tissue. Also, there was a boy that was warned because he stopped working on his schoolwork for over 10 seconds. There are techniques being used in this school that match up with all 8 categories used as brainwashing tools in the Korean War. Why is it that when we use these methods on prisoners of war, it's called brainwashing or torture, but when we use it on children who have mental disorders, it's called therapy? So another point I want to make is many of these methods are outlawed in prisons. So how is it that we can treat criminals more humanely than we can treat children with mental health issues? Now, in a future video, I'll be talking about why some guys like drunk girls. And also, is alcohol just a form of mind control for sex? And another video I'll be doing is, does free will actually exist?
There are over 350 videos on our channel, and I doubt you've seen them all. And the topics range from weight loss, nutrition, sexual health, all the way to psychology and mind control, and anywhere in between. And I think if you check them out, you're going to find some really interesting stuff.